Welcome back to The Common Historian, where history meets the supernatural. I'm Jeremy, and tonight I'm joined by demonologist and author James Annitto to discuss his upcoming book, The History of Demonology, released Good Friday, April 3rd, 2026. So grab your favorite beverage, dim the lights, and prepare to journey into the world where history refuses to stay buried. Welcome, James.
Thank you for having me.
Very excited that you were decided to come on, and you're talking about one of the things that I like to talk. You're an expert at one of the things that, the D word that, you know, I don't like to dramatize that. Like to do it as a serious conversation. So I know some places on YouTube that's not the same. That doesn't always happen. But kind of to get started, I wanted to kind of talk about, you've been investigating the paranormal since 2004. What was your initial experience that pulled you into the field?
Honestly, I never had a paranormal experience before that. It was really kind of like a battle of faith, right? I went through a lot of very hectic childhood. And so, like, I was raised and adopted by a Christian family. And I was hearing these theological basis of the Christian faith and started questioning it when I could cognitively understand and could read books and understand literature. Really kind of the idea of a higher power or God in the sense of Christianity or even most Western religions is that like what is God? And diving down that theological rabbit hole kind of led to things like ghosts, spirits, demons, angels, even into UFOs, aliens, because that's beyond Earth, that is extraterrestrial. So I really dug down the rabbit hole of the whole paranormal umbrella and really kind of led me more towards a fascination of what comes after life or after death, I should say. That's really what kind of held on to me. And then within that kind of search and kind of infield study, so to say, it really led me down to okay, I've experienced some things. Now let's try to help people that are wondering what they're experiencing, if it's mental health or if it's something actually preternatural or supernatural. That's really kind of what segued me into investigating the paranormal is just that inquiry of what comes after and what is God. And so it really is a different story than what most people say when they get involved in the paranormal or this sort of phenomenon because a lot of people have that experience and they question it. Me, I come from a different belief or a different branch, so
Yeah.
it's not bad.
When did you realize that demonology specifically was your kind of your calling?
Well, so I've always loved Epicurus, which is Theodicy's good versus evil, and I really love Greek mythology and, of course, the development of Greek philosophy, which is a lot of the cornerstones of what we understand in our ologies and our studies nowadays. A lot of it incorporated from Greek philosophers, and so I really always liked that realm of good versus evil, or the study of sin, which is hamartology, and so it really kind of led me down that pathway of well, people claim to deal with demons, do they exist? Because when I first got into demonology, I had refound my faith, but I did not necessarily still believe in demons, so to say. I thought it was like a projection of consciousness or some form of tool to use to scare people into doing good deeds, which is a common occurrence in humanity. But that's really kind of what led me down to doing demonology because I wanted to I believe I still don't understand what a ghost is. Those are still I do not know questions, but or answers I should say to those questions. But I came from a common understanding. Well, I've experienced things that normal empirical science or even theoretical science can't determine. So, okay, I have had these experiences, and then there are people that are dealing with these experiences and people dealing with afflictions, spiritual afflictions. How can I help them and how can I be an asset to these people? One of my first residential cases is kind of what lit that fire under me because for a long time I was just what I like to call a ghost hunter or legend tripper. I would just go around to a lot of these legendary surroundings, historical places, and would just do that. And when I got into doing residential cases, it kind of the the eyelids opened, peeled back, and realized that maybe this was my calling, especially with my love of it. Funny enough, I don't tell most people this, but it never came to fruition, so to say. But when I was a child, because of my questioning of God and theological basis and love for learning, is I wanted to become a priest or I wanted to be a police officer, which both are in some way helping people and furthering yourself. So it kind of like those things didn't happen. Like I did get ordained as a deacon and I was an ordained minister through the Church of Christ. These things that really didn't segue into that further point of actually becoming a priest or becoming a police officer. So I felt like that this was my calling. I was called to do it. It's not, I know there are people now, especially because the Warrens or some other people, maybe even myself, that really kind of want to get into demonology because they think it's a thrill ride. I never necessarily did. I just had a lot of questions. And, at the end of the day, led towards helping people.
Yeah, and you have a degree in psychology, and you mentioned you were an ordained deacon, and then
Yeah.
you in the last 14 years you've been kind of investigating demonic cases. How does these three backgrounds together, work together when you're evaluating a potential case?
Well, yeah, I'm a formally deacon. I don't like to say I'm a deacon anymore, but I think that that theological training of a certain basis and a certain viewpoint, I am Catholic now, was never before, but I feel like that helped me in understanding a specific mindset of culture, and at the end of the day, without theological debate, the Catholic Church is the oldest Christian church to still be existing to this day beside the Orthodox Church. So,
Yeah.
it follows a long lineage of history of good versus evil, but also the sacraments and all that stuff. So it was great learning that because it was a tool necessary to understanding and training to help me better understand people's faith one-dimensional way. I like to say I'm eclectic. I am a Christian, but I have studied through obtuse amount of religions. There's over 4,000 in the world. I've studied a great chunk of those. But yeah, as far as the psychology realm, yeah, I'm a bachelor's. I'm currently in my master's program and should have been about a year or so, my master's degree, as long as everything goes right. But that has a lot to do with it as well, because one of the common signs of demonic hauntings or evil spirits are latching onto somebody that has trauma or some sort of mental or physical or some sort of even spiritual affliction. So, it's great understanding the person's mindset, what they're thinking, how are they living their life. So that realm comes into play. And then, of course, the investigating, when you take a lot of the investigative techniques, either as even being a detective or, going back to a police officer or doing interviews as an employer, so you can take that into when you're dissecting people and trying to figure out their story, a cause and effect to what's going on. So all three meld in a true fashion because most people have a faith, and if they don't, in the secular sense, they have it in another form of fashion. They have faith in themselves or faith in their family. We all have a component of faith. It's part of the human brain. It's proven. So, it all works in synchronicity in the sense of why each part of what my tool sets are that work for what I do.
So, you've written two books now, the psychological dimensions of the paranormal in
Mhm.
2025, and then the new book, The History of Demonology, coming out in April. What made you decide to tackle the psychological side first before diving into the like kind of the historical perspective?
Well, psychology is an equal love to this supernatural, I would say, because, what led me to the paranormal was childhood trauma and other things. So it was being in my degree program and having to write a dissertation paper eventually. I kind of got to start on it by writing a book before the dissertation that usually most people write into a book or make a book. I really have a love with understanding the psychology what people are dealing with in a haunting or how they interpret it culturally. I wanted to write that book because there are not many books in the paranormal realm that tackle the subject. Now, if you get out into the social science and look at like parapsychology or anomalous psychology, then there's more books. But a lot of those books are geared towards academics. And so I wanted to write a simple book. It's a very short read, but it's full of a lot of information that anybody can take in or anybody can debate within themselves. It's a book that I wrote that's not biased. I walk a middle ground. Like I look at believers and I look at skeptics and I say why can be presented in both different fashions, especially through psychological or neuroscience scientific advancements that we have. So I wanted to write it because there's really nothing like it. Because I think a lot of people lose the thought of psychology when it comes to a haunting, regardless if it's, of course, corporeal or non-corporeal.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I wrote that book first because once again, I'm in my degree program and I felt like it was a necessity for how I wanted to advance my dissertation.
Okay. Makes sense to me.
To be honest with you, I don't think I've really been asked why I wrote that, maybe a couple times, but really, like most people know me as a demonologist. That is what is kind of bred my who I am. So, but there are demonology books out there. Like there are great books that have been written about like demons and like demonology in a full, like the Encyclopedia of Demonology, the Dictionary of Demons. But once again, those are big compilations of material, like hundreds of pages. This book, The History of Demons, is once again going to be a short read, probably 160 something pages. It's going to give you meat after meat after meat after meat, and you're going to walk away from that book and have a better understanding of the history of demonology without having to read hundreds and hundreds of pages or have to spend 50, 60, $70 some of these books cost. The first book costed $10.50. It's not a monetary gain for me, it's a knowledge gain. I want people to become smarter. And this book is the same thing. It's probably going to be priced at $10.50. I want it to be accessible. People that have money, don't have money. $10.50 is 2 cups of coffee nowadays from Dunkin' or from Starbucks. So you can withdraw from your coffee for 2 days and buy the book and learn something. And that's what
Yeah.
I hope.
Yeah. Another thing I was kind of curious about, your book's going to be releasing on Good Friday. Did you choose that specific date
Did,
uh,
yes.
for the significant,
I did,
can you
yes.
explain the significance of that to the audience?
Yeah, well, that of course most people know that is the death of Jesus, right? Before his resurrection. And before I wrote these books, I kind of took a hiatus. I'm very well known for taking hiatuses in my life, and I disappear. And a lot of these are through my own trials and tribulations or my own mistakes. And so I'm not saying I'm Jesus because I owe everything to Jesus Christ. But at the end of the day, is like these books were my resurrection. Like I've been told for years, even if not for a decade, to write a book. And in my absence of about 10 months, wrote 2 books, went to school, took care of 2 children, worked my career. So I look at it as my resurrection as a human that I was able to put my mind to it and I was able to overcome the hurdles that were presented to me and I came out stronger, better, and I came out with, I think, in my biased opinion, 2 masterpieces of my own approach.
Okay. So when you're tracing the history of demonology, what time period or culture surprised you most in terms of how they understand and dealt with demonic entities?
Well, the book starts off in Mesopotamian times. The idea of evil spirits probably predate that with more knowledge now that we understand we're actually older than 10,000 years old as humans. I think we're at probably 250,000 years old, if not older now with what carbon dating. And so, the more that we unravel those cultures, I bet we will unravel a commonality from Mesopotamia to maybe even back to modern times where really the idea of evil hasn't changed too much, but the ideas of what it is have, Mesopotamian, Sumerian cultures and the cradle of civilization, we like to call it, really took spiritualism to a whole nother level. It was their daily life. Egyptians, you saw this as well with Egyptian mythology, spirit, and giving to that life so that your loved ones wouldn't haunt you by giving items to them and remembering them. but letting them sleep eternally, or they would come back and haunt you. Like these things have traced humanity. So I really want to say I was shocked. I would say that I've known the history of demonology for a very long time, but really I think what the reader might partake in my book, and like I try not to stay heavy on two certain subjects. I try to tackle it enough where you walk away. But I would say my most fascinating part of demonology history would be the European Inquisition. Because in the United States we talk about the Connecticut, or more so the famously known Salem witch trials, even though they started in Connecticut, where maybe 20 or so people died. In the European Inquisition, the numbers are stated to be up to 1 million people, if not more, that died due to superstition and supernatural. So I always look at that as the most fascinating because it was the point where religion, or the idea of demons, was used against people. And some people really thought what they were proclaiming against certain people, and other people were using it as a cash grab or other means of advancement in their clan or their family. So I look at that part of demonology history as the most fascinating because tons of people died from it.
Yeah, yeah. How has the historical understanding of demonology evolved from ancient civilizations through medieval times to modern day?
Well, yeah, it's a a good question because in the cradle of civilization, or even the early advancements of human understanding of faith, is that like I said, everything was either good or bad, right? Or neutral, and it could be good or bad. Like Pazuzu, most famously known from The Exorcist, now associated with the Ouija board. Pazuzu was a demon, but he was also prey to fight Lamashtu from eating babies, right? So there was a neutral sense. There was no really yin and the yang. It was a neutral. They could either be good or bad, but a lot of times they were bad. And that you see that advancement even in Hinduism, which is the oldest modern day religion existing. And so
Yeah,
you see that advancement. Where it really changes was of course, Enlightenment era, where people started really kind of digging deep into books, asking questions. A lot of this started with Greek philosophy, as I discussed earlier, where you had Socrates and Plato, and you had Hippocrates, the father of medicine, start dabbling into the mind and the outer ego, so to say, and how it incorporated the spiritual realm, or how it disassociated from that. Hippocrates is famously, well, not famously known, but if you do your research, is known to have performed exorcisms on people as a placebo effect, as a form of healing an ailment that they thought they were dealing with. So I really would say the Enlightenment era, but that also era of philosophy advanced because, philosophy brought upon psychology, social science. That was the forefather of a lot of our modern advancements. But really, where it's night and day is modern times, right? Now we integrated more that there's psychosis, bipolar, dissociative identity disorder, schizophrenia. We've kind of, the people that died during the Inquisition that had those things, now people aren't dying because of that. We are so more mental health perceived than we ever have. More
yeah,
people have a disorder through the DSM-5 than you've ever can imagine. We all probably have a disorder to a degree. But I think that's where the advancement is. Now we look more at science, and that's just how I approach it as well, is we now look at more science before we jump to the conclusion that there is quintessentially something demonic there. And that's the true advancement, that we're checking all the boxes off before we jump to a conclusion. And I can't say everybody does that, but I do that.
yeah. So, in researching the history, did you find documented historical cases that would still be considered legitimate demonic activity by today's standards, or were most explainable by knowledge limitations of their time?
Well, the History of Demonology book doesn't necessarily talk about that. I actually talk about that in my first book.
Okay,
It's split up into three parts. It's spirits, demons, and then humans, the human mind. And in the second part, I definitely talk about some famous cases and some not so famous cases, unless you're in the field of demonology, or that realm of the field. And so I talk about those, and I give kind of an outlook on how specialists or experts now look at that, or looked at it back then, but it was hush hushed because of the dramatization or the outward nature of how it was perceived. But yeah, I would say a lot of the cases throughout time were misconceived, like I do like to say that there might have been some, and I wasn't there. So, I'm take it with a grain of salt, people.
Yeah.
But, I do think that in a lot of my cases that the mental health can be there, but something else can be as well. That so doesn't throw it out. But once again, how much was it mental health to a spiritual affliction? And some people would say it doesn't matter because they still had a spiritual affliction. But what outweighed it? What made it more of this cult classic case that people know of? Like, Annalise McKell, a famous, known one that inspired the exorcism of Emily Rose. She died of malnutrition. And, she also was diagnosed with strokes on, I can't think of off the top of my head, but she was diagnosed with some medical issues. And those things were kind of thrown out the window because the family thought she was possessed. And so, due to negligence, the girl died because there was not medical staff involved. And she died from not intaking food or water. But that's a case I do believe that if you look at it through a modern day lens, there probably were a lot more apparent mental health things involved that maybe led to that spiritual affliction. And once again, it doesn't denote the fact she dealt with something. Yeah. But, if they handled the mental health and the physical health, you know, likely she would have survived. And that go where it goes hand in hand. But yeah, the first book talks a little bit about that. There's a whole part to it, and I think people would find that fascinating, like the Nuns of Lourdes, and I talk about a few other cases that predate a lot of the modern cases, like one in South America. So I think that you could reevaluate it now, but we can't, unfortunately, right? We don't have a time machine.
So I did read, I think on your website that you led a 2022 tour to Romania, exploring the geographical roots of Dracula.
Yep.
How does the historical Vlad the Impaler and the Dracula mythology connect to the actual traditions in the region?
You know, that's a funny thing. Yeah, I love Romania. Oh gosh, I want to go back so bad. It really was a spiritual journey, man. Like that place is just a whole nother level. It is everything that you would hope to be. But, the one thing about what we misinterpret in Western culture with for Vlad the Impaler is he was a national hero. He's still on their currency, he's still on stamps. He's praised because he fought off the Turks. He died eventually, was beheaded, and but he's praised there. He's a national hero while we villainize him because of his connection to Bram Stoker's Dracula. He did some heinous things, but he did decapitate people, put their heads on pikes, and you know, did do things that would scare the enemy and maybe were inhumane. But for one, they were people invading his country doing the same thing to his people. And so he used it as a scare tactic to the Turks. And, you could say that's good or bad. I know a lot of people would say it's bad because we're in a different culture now and mindset nowadays, but he did what he thought was best for his people. He was kind of a jerk to his own people at moments in time, but how it conceives to the idea of like Bram Stoker Dracula is, the idea of the historical, not the non-true historical accounts of him drinking blood and stuff that mystified him as this larger than life figure doing the things that he ate people, drank blood, which a lot of people in that culture doesn't say ever actually really happened. But I think that's where it would apply, where that root of Dracula. But one of the things that most people don't understand about Romanian culture, even or Slavic culture in general, going up north towards Russia and stuff, is they have the oldest vampire beliefs in human history. And in Romania, they're called the Strigoi, and that's really kind of what kind of led to the modern vampire culture nowadays. And to be honest with you, in Romania, they still believe in the Strigoi. Like they're very hesitant to go in forest at night. We did an investigation of Hoyabaka Forest, the second most famous forest in the world beside Aokigahara, Japan. But, for people that don't know Hoyabaka Forest, it's the forest that there's a big circle in the middle and nothing grows, and they don't understand why still, even through geographic dissection. But yeah, even, they would warn you to go over there because they feel like the Strigoi will come and get you, even though I think it's probably a better chance of a gypsy attacking you than a Strigoi. But, but yeah, no, Romania was fascinating. One of my favorite novels growing up was Bram Stoker's Dracula. And so just to see Bram Castle was cool. The unfortunate thing about that castle is likely Vlad the Impaler never actually went there, or if he did, it was one time. Really, the most famous castle besides Pretoria Fortress, which was his fortress, was Corvin's Castle, which is where they filmed The Nun. And Corvin's Castle is where he was imprisoned for numerous years. And that's a really fascinating place. Also, a cool thing too is we weren't, if not the first United States group, but if not one of the first few international groups to actually investigate his birth home.
That's
Yeah,
that's cool.
yeah, that was pretty fascinating. Now it's a restaurant, but yeah, it was pretty cool. It was surreal to be in his birth home.
Romania is on my list that I'd like to go to someday. Scotland and England are top of my list.
Yeah.
I've never been there.
I will tell anybody, and I'm not saying this, but if anybody that is interested in Romania, do while you're young because there's a lot of walking, a lot of cobblestones, a lot of stairs. The older you get, it's not going to be fun. I'm telling you.
Oh, I'd imagine, yeah. What is one historical misconception about demonology that, people widely believe, but, is the historical records actually dispute?
I think the most famous, well-known one misconception, of demonology is everything is a demon. That's probably the most. That's the number one one.
Number one.
Like, there's still a lot of people that have that misconception, unfortunately.
Okay. So I know you have a new podcast coming up in June.
Yes.
You're launching it's the Nine Gates podcast, and that's with folklorist Victoria J. What's
Mhm.
the vision behind this project, and how does her folklore background kind of complement your psychological approach?
Yeah, so Nine Gates, of course, is a spin on Nine Circles, which is Dante Alighieri's Dante's Inferno, which is a great freaking poem or a novel, however you want to interpret it, and how you compile the series. But it's a spin on that. Victoria J and I just had met. We actually haven't physically met, but virtually or from a distance met through social media. And I've been following her work because I respect anybody that puts the academic time into their life to unlock the knowledge and learn things and go down that rabbit hole. And so she has a master's in folklore, and I see that she calls herself the demon folklorist. So there's a lot of folklore when it comes to demons. And I thought, okay, well, with what she's writing, we don't see eye to eye on everything. I disagree with a lot with what she says, and she disagrees with me. But we also have that common respect, and we also have commonalities where we agree with the same thing. You know, so we started talking, and I said, "Well, would you want to do something together?" And she was like, "Yeah, I'm new into the paranormal, and I'm making a name for myself." And I said, "Well, let's make a name for ourselves together and doing the Nine Gates podcast." The mission of it is to really kind of pull back the misconceptions of demonology or demonic folklore and how everybody interprets everything to be a demon or mischaracterizes it. The real life experiences of myself and other people that have wrote about it or dealt with it, and how folklore deals with it, like how the cultural interpretations of it has advanced, what stories, what customs have passed down through generations, which is what folklore is: legends, myths, fables. So, which, as we talked about earlier, it has developed. Some traditional stories and customs and beliefs haven't changed, even though the advancements of the humanities have changed and how we diagnose it and look at it. So That's the point of the podcast. We're going to do it once a month. It's not going to be every week or every day thing. It's going to be a once a month thing where we tackle a topic specific that we can either talk about for 1 to 3 hours. And it really depends on how much we want to dig deep into that topic. But, we're going to have guests on certain topics. And sometimes it's just going to be Victoria and I either debating, discussing, talking, presenting questions to each other, kind of going down that rabbit hole of bringing like this information to people that have preconceived notions of demonology or demonic folklore. Our first episode is on 6/6/26. For the first show, we are having John Zaffis on with us, and the topic is, of course, Introduction to Demonology. He'll be on the second hour. The first hour is going to be talking about the show, talking about our backgrounds, talking about demonology, and then we're going to bring John on, and he's been doing this for a
Or
very long time. Ed Warren was his uncle, so he has a lineage of doing this, and we want to ask him his points of view of demonology, how he has seen it advance or dilapidate modern understanding, and how he approaches it. So it'll be interesting. I think people are going to find it interesting. I think even if we don't have a lot of viewers, or I think it's going to be interesting for Victoria and I to publicly get our debates out there and discussions because, you know, one thing that I don't see all the time is discussion or debate without it being healthy. And, we need to generate questions. And we might not get an answer from that question. We might have another question to that question, but the more questions you ask, eventually you're gonna get to the tip of the iceberg.
yeah, it sounds really interesting. I'll have to try to check that out when it comes out in June.
Yeah, it's gonna
And
be live. It's gonna be live. We might pre-record. The first episode will be live out the airwaves, and then how we approach it from there will depend on the first episode how it does. We might, but I feel like you yourself as somebody that loves history. Of course, the common historian.
yeah,
That I think you'll find it interesting.
it sounds really interesting. And John is you know, a legend in the paranormal. And I think he'll really, I look forward to hearing you and Tim and, you know, debate.
Yeah. No, the funny thing is me and John have talked many times, like person to person, private settings or public settings, but privately. But he's a wealth of knowledge. He's seen a lot of things,
Yeah.
and I think it's just going to be fascinating that we might pick his brain differently than somebody else has, approaching it the way we are approaching it.
Yeah. Because you guys are probably approaching it a little bit different than some other
Yeah,
people might.
yeah, which is not bad. Everybody has
No, it's
a
not bad at all.
yeah,
It's always good to have a different, perspective. That's what I try to do here too, is when I'm
yeah.
interviewing is a little bit different perspective.
It was called Duo Demonology. It was with Carl Johnson, and we lectured around the country. And we did have a YouTube series that we would come out with, and it was quite successful in its mission. And, I think that adding the element of a master in folklore, I think it's going to be a different direction in a good way, but my whole mission is not only just helping people, that's my number one goal, but my
Yeah.
second goal is to instill knowledge in people, have people ask questions. Like even my first book, like I've had people tell me like you made me question my experiences, and I'm like, good. I'm not saying that your experiences were bad or wrong or not what occurred, but it's good to ask questions in that situation. Like what part of it was me? What part of it was not me, was external? So I want people to walk away with something. And even when I lecture, my as much as I've lectured in front of thousands of people before, I've lectured in front of a couple people before, and I've always said in my head is that if one of those people walk away with a question or hint of knowledge or something that they want to dig deeper from that, I did my part. I did what I was supposed to do.
Okay. Now, I believe that you have collaborated with Father Bob Bailey.
Yeah,
Um,
great friend of mine.
I think you guys did the Faith and Reason lecture series. How do different Christian traditions approach demonology differently? Do they approach it differently?
Every form of Christianity has some form of deliverance kind of ministry or healing ministry. But how they like, of course, with the Roman Catholic Church, you have exorcisms, deliverance ministry. Exorcisms tend to be used over people that are possessed, while deliverances are done over people that might be oppressed or home that has an infestation. Or you might do their minor rite of exorcism, which is over a house or a location. So you have a lot of that lineage of the Roman Catholic Church or the Catholic Church itself that has that might invoke the Holy Spirit to work through the person and relieve them of their demons. But also, certain Christian denominations are as well more prone to label something as demonic than other ones as well. So there is definitely different. I wasn't always Catholic. When I got back into Christianity, I was actually a member of the Church of Christ, and the, they would approach deliverance differently as well than when I was working with Father Bob or approaching it from the Catholic sense. But, working with Father Bob, and I still work with Father Bob, we just don't lecture together anymore. He's a great friend. I see him every Wednesday. And we get together, talk, have dinner. It was always interesting to take it from somebody that's been a priest for over 30 years, because I have a tremendous respect for anybody that dedicates their life to become a Catholic priest. It's 10 years of schooling, a lot of formation. It's not easy. And
No,
that's why a lot of
no.
people don't do it. But, so I respect his outlook. I don't, once again, with him, I don't agree with everything he has to say. And of course, he doesn't agree with a lot of what I
Everything.
have to say. But
Yeah,
we have that common respect where we can come, okay, we're saying different things, but it's very similar, right? And he
yeah.
has his experiences. I have my experiences. And once again, he was faith. I was reason. I approached it from the reason, like the psychological, like approaching it analytically, critically, and applying that. And I'm not saying that he didn't approach it analytically and critically as well, but that was what I harped on more than the faith thing. But both components, it wasn't faith versus reason, it was faith and reason because you need both faith and
Both.
reason.
Yeah. Okay. So where do you draw the line between kind of psychological issues, mental health crisis, and genuine demonic activity?
Well, I hate getting statistical data. I love statistics because data doesn't lie. I hate when people say data is accurate. Well, yeah, it is, especially depending on the population pool, how it's gathered. But through my own personal experiences, I've only had probably half a dozen cases that were legitimately what I would call demonic. And, I've been doing this for 20 years, 14, 15 years in the demonology realm. But still, for, you know, for 4 to 6 cases to be quoted as demonic in my personification of it is very minimal. And that shows you that, it is a rare occurrence. Once again, though, I speak for myself. There are other people that I know might approach it and might label it as such. But I of course, have labeled things that felt had commonalities that gave off the same sort of devilish tactics and deceptions and misconceptions that would be presented in this in circumstance. But unfortunately, even in those cases, I like to say the commonality in the demonic cases was trauma. So there is mental health even with those cases because trauma
Yeah.
is a component of your mental health, and so which also could take a physical toll on you as well. But so a lot of the more, if not all those cases had trauma and even like negative spirits or negative cases, either if it's a self projection, like a poltergeist or a tulpa or egregore or something, or artificial intelligence, the metaphysical sense of it, even those things can be tainted by the mental health. Then where it becomes a reality, the psychic projection. And that still is not a demon, but still not any less interesting. And then, but I tend to see that the human component, aka why I wrote the first book as well, the human component is the component of the haunting or being haunted because as I like to say, we think of the paradox, what came first, the chicken or the egg? What came first, the haunting or the human? And I think
Yeah.
that there's a common ground, a tethering of us that make this occur to happen and why it happens as well, internally, externally. And I think it all has a piece to the puzzle.
Can you kind of walk us through what happens when someone contacts you thinking they have a demonic problem? What's kind of your evaluation process?
So yeah, my evaluation process doesn't really change much unless there's children involved. If there's children involved, I kind of segue very fast and I do my process, but I attempt to get involved physically sooner because I don't want the kids to be tormented by somebody that's putting stuff in their head if there's not something happening. I just had kind of a case like that happen where the person thought they were dealing with the demon, and we had to kind of get somebody outside the paranormal involved, unfortunately. But my process is, I usually would be referred or contacted by somebody through email, through Facebook Messenger. So when they email me or Facebook Messenger me, I send them a questionnaire to fill out. It's probably a dozen pages of different things of what they're experiencing. They have suicidal thoughts or thoughts of harming others, what medicines they're on, are they witnesses, what do they think what's happening? Have they had media involvement? Have they had a priest there before? Have they had teams there before? These are things that I gather. If somebody does approach me and say that they're dealing with a demon and they're self-diagnosing themselves, that's an instantaneous red flag, as most people that are possessed throughout literature was did not know that they were possessed. The people that reached out and their family or friends reached out to the people to help them, like Annalise McKell, or Roland Doe or Robbie Mannheim, Exorcist case. His parents reached out, so you know usually the person that is the demoniac, which is the possessed individual, won't reach out because, they're being contorted, they're being controlled by this force. It's a battle of free will. So when they tell me and they self-diagnose, especially if nobody's ever been involved,
Yeah.
like no other team, then that's a red flag. So I go a little deep. In that case, likely I will have them get a psychological evaluation, so that will be that process. But usually, if it's a normal process, like if they believe they're dealing with something but they don't know what they're dealing with, I'll do an email questionnaire, I'll do a phone questionnaire, and then I'll do a physical interview and an assessment of what's going on physically. And the reason I do a three-part stage, and it's the same questionnaire over and over again, is because I want to see if they're changing their story, if they're adding elements, if they're changing things dramatically. And that helps me kind of come up with like, okay, well, they're staying with the same story, nothing's changed. They might add things because, if it takes us a week or 2 weeks to get out there, things are going to happen in that 1 to 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So they're adding from what their constant story already was. But yeah, that's my process. And unfortunately, if, you're not able to work through that process, or if you're proclaiming to be possessed and you're not willing to get a psychological evaluation, unfortunately, I'm not able to help you. Because if you're not willing to take the steps to have me get involved to help you, you're not willing to help yourself. And unfortunately, I don't wave a magic wand. I don't have spirit fingers, and I can't rid you of your issue if you're not willing to accept it, but overcome what you're dealing with internally as well. It's a battleground, right? So you have to spiritually dominate, and you also have to mentally dominate. You have to want to be helped, and you have to want to listen. And a culmination of things have to happen for you to rid yourself of an affliction, especially a demon. So it's a process. I might sidestep some things just to do like a wellness checkup on the children and feel it out because I don't want kids that are in that situation, if it's real or if it's not something of the mind or something misconceived. I do not want the children to have a lasting effect of this in their life with post-traumatic stress or some level of trauma that they carry on until their adulthood.
Okay. So, what was what's the most historically significant location that you've investigated? A place where history and the paranormal were deeply connected. Kind of a little more off the demonic topic, but
I'd have to be honest with you, investigating Vlad the Impaler's home was probably one of the most, in sense of like history, because when Vlad the Impaler was alive was even before United States of America was
Yeah.
existent. So, we have a lot of interesting history here, and I've been thankful to investigate from the east to the west coast. I live in Rhode Island. Massachusetts is north of me, of course, and New England was the founding colonies of this country. If you don't throw Roanoke in there and Jamestown, but it's littered with history. But I'd have to say Romania was top notch. Even like recent history, like the USS Salem, S SK Pierce House, the Winchester Mystery House, like you know a litany of locations you can think of in the United States. I've likely have investigated. They all have a piece of historical value, but there's still nothing cooler than investigating something that predates our own culture of America.
Yeah.
And I find that fascinating because, I attempt to be a citizen of the world, which is trying to learn every culture. Maybe one day I'll visit every single location that I possibly can when my kids get older. But I find that fascinating. I want to go to Greece. I want to go to Egypt. I want to go everywhere. I want to go to Scotland. I want to go to the United Kingdom. Hell, I would love to go to Turkey, to go to Istanbul, or I like to call Constantinople. But I'd like to view all that. But yeah, I would say Romania is probably the historically more significant place I've ever investigated. Even being in a Roman fortress that's now a modern city, it is nothing like it. Walking through this monstrous fortress and thinking there was Roman soldiers here, and they probably maybe fought the Persians here at one point, or so I find that fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know that you mentioned a little bit earlier, but beyond demonology, you have an interest in ufology and cryptozoology.
Yeah.
Do you see a connection between these different unexplained phenomenons, and or are they completely in a separate category from demonology?
Well, I actually think there's a connection. I think there's a lot of similarities between demonic possession and abduction cases or alien involvement. One case that I have talked about before is I was called in to consult, and later then MUFON got involved with things that unraveled, kind of led away from the spiritual to more of the extraterrestrial. I think there is a common ground. Like even possession cases, they lose time. Abduction cases, they lose time. They have nightmares, they have these dreams in both scenarios. Some people talk of these beings talking to them. There are common grounds in the sense of ufology with demonology and the paranormal, which is to me a whole umbrella of all those things. There's a lot of commonalities. The cryptids, I was on Finding Bigfoot for 5 seconds. I don't talk about that much, but I did have, I do believe, a Bigfoot experience in Rhode Island at a cemetery that is connected to woods. And I do believe that these are creatures or things that maybe aren't discovered yet. I don't really necessarily harp on that and believe on that. I do believe that it has more of a common association with like the mountain gorilla of Japan that was discovered only a couple hundred years ago, and those were thought to be a mythical creature as well, or the giant squid as well. So I take to believe that maybe those are creatures we don't understand. I think even not too long ago, the chupacabra was found out to be like a mangy dog or something like that that really wasn't known, like understood. And so
Yeah.
a lot of these cryptid creatures might have species that aren't found. I like to equate it, like when I was younger, I like to say I was a Darwinist. I really was into evolutionary biology, which is now known as neo-Darwinism, because a lot of those biological evolutionary thoughts have developed and evolved. But, when he found the Galapagos Islands, there were species that we did not understand, or that at that point in time, and understanding how environment has something to play. But what I find fascinating about a lot of these cryptids, in some form or fashion, they travel culture. Look at the abdominal snowman, the Yeti in Siberia, Russia, upper China, like Tibet and stuff like that. You speak about thunderbirds, which have been sighted throughout the whole world. A lot of these have commonalities. The Loch Ness monster, Lake Champlain, Champy, once again, commonalities. One's across the pond, one's here near New York. And so, I find it fascinating. But once again, though, I believe, and I don't misquote me, but I believe we found a fish that we thought was to be extinct that's like 350 million years old or something, and we just discovered to still be intact and still be alive. So you never know what's out there. If things have been around a lot longer than us, they know how to adapt, they know how to hide, they know how to stay away from it. I also equate that to humans too. There are civilizations out there that are unbeknownst of the modern civilization and they keep to themselves. They have a different outlook on life probably or humanity. I think it all has a commonality because it's all unknown, right? That's what the paranormal is, the unknown. So the unknown can be equated to everything in life, especially specifically to those points too.
For someone who's watching that might think they're dealing with something demonic versus just a standard haunting, what are the red flags or warning signs that indicate they need a demonologist rather than just a regular paranormal investigator?
Well, I always believe if you feel like you're dealing with something, instead of web emptying your situation and self-diagnosing, I think you should reach out to the best, closest person you can. I think you should reach out to a paranormal team before you reach out to me. Not to say that it would be wasting my time, but they're more capable of probably with manpower wise and availability depending on where it is to get there faster
Yeah,
than myself. So I always advocate for them to find somebody that can diagnose it. But there are dangers in that because no paranormal team was created equally, and some will jump to the worst case scenario and some won't. You talked about the YouTube phenomenon not too long ago about demons, demons, demons everywhere.
yeah,
So we have to be cautious of that, and that could cause mayhem in that life. And if they do that, it could make my life a lot worse, even if they get me involved. But I definitely believe that if you believe you're dealing with something, don't self-diagnose. Social media is pretty big nowadays. You can look up teams to see if people have had bad experiences, or you can see if they're on YouTube doing certain things that might not fit your ethics or morals. I would reach out to somebody close to you, or even if you think it's a demon because of your cultural belief or your faith, definitely reach out to me and could sit down with you and talk you through it and kind of dissect what you're going through. Likely, and I can be wrong, I'm human, but likely from the first few conversations or even the first conversation hearing you, I likely could tell you it's not demonic. And, not once again, I'm not always right on that standpoint, but I can give some alleviance of saying, hey, before you jump into these worst case scenarios, like it's saying like, oh, I have a cough, I have lung cancer, right? It's like the worst case scenario. Yeah. Or maybe I just have infection or
yeah,
bacteria, right? So it's like we have to clear the boxes before we jump to that worst case scenario. And so for people that might be dealing with something, reach out for help. The more people you have in the boat, the faster the boat goes. But so yeah, so that's what I would tell people that require help or believe they might need it or are confused, right? Some people don't need help. They're just confused with what's going on. And they just want to know if they're crazy or not. Like, why is that door opening? Like, is it because the floor is unlevel or the hinges are, which is a common occurrence with a lot of old
yeah,
homes. I even use a level on a lot of my cases, check levels of floor for equilibrium changes. Like I'm in construction, like I'm a project manager for the HVAC and plumbing field. So I do a lot of those checks,
yeah.
infiltration of air. And so I utilize a lot of that just to make sure that we get rid of the natural before we jump to the supernatural.
Kind of the last question I had for you, where can people find, where can they order your books, find you,
Yeah.
all of that stuff?
Yeah, so I'm not privy to a lot of social media. You can find me on Facebook, James Annitto, as it's written on below my mug. And you can also go to jamesannitto.com and or Amazon, search James Annitto. My books will come up, or my one book will come up, and soon my second book as of April 3rd. But you can also go to my website, which has direct link. Will have a direct link for the second book, but has a direct link for my first book that you can go to, and eventually probably will have the link for the podcast as well, which will be on YouTube, Facebook. That can be found on my Facebook as of right now, and we do have a page for it called not the Nine Gates Podcast, and so you can follow that as well. That'll be released June 6th, the day before my birthday. So if you're interested in following me, either Facebook or my website, and if you can't find me on Facebook, my website also has my Facebook link as well.
And I will make sure I put those links in the description below here as well, so they're easy for the viewers to find. And, it's been absolutely fascinating talking with you tonight. And I thank you for coming on the show. And for my listeners, if you found this conversation intriguing, make sure you subscribe to The Common Historian so you don't miss our weekly deep dives into the haunted history. Check out James's Nine Gates podcast in June and the channel on YouTube. And you can check out his website as well, and the links will be all below. And remember, history never truly dies, it just finds new ways to haunt us. Until next week, keep digging into the darkness.